There we go.
Perfect. So it's just gearing up here on our end. And it should be showing live, but it's just loading. And now I'm going to come back to this screen. So we are now live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to everybody who's joining us today on the Command Post. Welcome back. We are on episode 21, which I actually can't believe. So thank you all for those of you who have joined us this far. I'm so lucky today because I have some amazing guests who are going to tell us some really compelling stories, share their experiences, and most importantly, help others who might be going through some of the same things that they have gone through in the past. So today we're going to be focusing on trauma and how it affects military families. And I'd like to introduce, I'm going to use first names only because that's where we are at this point. We've talked about peeing in the bathroom. So I think that we're way past last names at this point. So I have on my left, top left, I have Sheri. I have Polly, who has joined us before as a guest. I have Tabitha joining us. We have Rich and we have Diane. So thank you, all of you, for joining me here today and talking about such an important topic, a sensitive topic, something that I think we can all learn from. I do want to say to everybody who's watching us at home right now, I'm not sure where this episode is going to go, but some of the experiences could be triggering to individuals who have gone through trauma in the past and have gone through it or are currently recognizing it. So I have my CEO, Rick, who is monitoring our live Facebook right now, and he's going to be putting up some resources that you can access if you feel the need to get some extra help. And of course, if after this episode you have any questions, you can reach out to myself or Rick and any of our guests, as they have allowed me to say, specifically Polly, who does this for a living. And so hopefully we all take away a lot from this episode. So thank you all. Thank you. That's my very long rant to say thank you. I really love who we have collected here today. And that's very much a tribute to Polly. When I reached out to Polly and said to her that I wanted to discuss trauma and how it can affect military families, she procured this amazing group of individuals who have such diverse experiences and perspectives on what trauma looks like. So I have Diane, who's going to be talking to us today. Diane is part of a dual service couple who has experienced an OSI. We have Sheri, who is Diane's daughter, who is going to speak to us today about what life was like growing up with two parents who had PTSD. Polly, I'd like for you to share your experiences as well. Polly has lived with her husband, who has been diagnosed with an OSI. We have Rich with us today, who also was diagnosed with an OSI, who has since done a ton of work and is actually working on counseling other individuals in the area. And we have Tabitha, who has, again, just an interesting and really unique take on what it looks like to have an OSI, because what I found fascinating about your story that we'll get into, Tabitha, is the way that you coped with your OSI and how that sort of manifested itself. So I'm going to pick no one in particular. Maybe actually, that's not true. I'm going to pick on Polly first because she's been here before, and I feel like everybody else just needs to take a breath. And I don't know if everybody's nervous or not. But Polly, before we kind of get into everything, why don't you tell us what your military family looks like? How did your husband sort of get into the military? When did you get involved? Was he already in, or did he get in after you guys were married? Tell us kind of what your family looks like.
So for me, my spouse joined the military in 1988. We actually started dating in 89 and we were married in 91. So we just celebrated our 30th anniversary. So I joined him in 91 in Lahr, Germany. That's where he was posted at the time. And so that took us from Germany to Ottawa, where our first son was born. And then we moved to Petawawa. And that's when Sean did his workup and his tour in Bosnia, which was 94, 95. And when he came home 3 weeks later, I gave birth. I was going to say we, but he didn't really do much.
He did nothing. Nothing. He was there for the start of it for a few minutes, and
that's right, and then the end. Yeah. So we had our second son, Mitchell, And actually that summer, Sean got out of the military. So that was 95. He had done 6.5 years, and it was just, it was where the military was at that time. There wasn't a lot of promotions. There wasn't a lot of remustering to a different trade and stuff. So we kind of thought our best option was to get out, move home, and he was going to be a cop or a firefighter or corrections, which didn't pan out, obviously. He ended up in a factory job, and probably about 6 months after, not that I knew what it was because I had no idea, but that's when his symptoms started of not sleeping, being hypervigilant, sleeping with a knife under the pillow, asking me about smells, different things like that. So fast forward 4 years, he met another veteran in a bar, and they started talking. This particular veteran had been on the tour right before him, and they started talking about Veterans Affairs. And my spouse at the time was 31, and he was like, I'm not a veteran, I don't qualify. It was that you thought World War II veterans or Korean veterans, right? So and he was like, no, you need to go, you need to get help. So that was the start. He was diagnosed in June of 99, and it's been a journey ever since.
Hmm. And when he was actually, I'm gonna hold off on that question because I want to go to everybody and
Yeah.
I want to dig deeper. Diane, can you tell us what your military family looks like? How both you and your husband got in, maybe how you met, and how many years you both served?
Jim and I met in Cornwallis. We were both in training at the time. He was on his twos course and I was on my ones course. And we ended up getting married that summer. And we waited about 5 years before we had our first child. And then 6 months later, Sheri came along. And I went, oops.
I was oops.
So Jim was in for 31 years, and 18 of those were at sea.
Wow.
I had 3 kids and he wasn't there for any of them.
Hmm.
I said, if you want to be here for any, you got to have your own. And the last one almost died. And he had to come home from Norway by himself. They wouldn't pay for his way. They wouldn't help him at all. They wouldn't do anything. And so he came home. And he stood in the doorway of my hospital room and he said, you want the good news or the bad news? And I said, okay, good news. He says, I'm here. Bad news? He says, I'm leaving tomorrow on course. I said, why the hell did you bother coming home? Which was bitter and cold, but that's where I was.
And were you still serving at this time?
No.
No, you were. How long did you serve for, Diane?
I served for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, they docked your pay when you got married, and they docked your pay again if you wanted to live ashore with your husband. Women had no grounds for anything. If you got pregnant or you were in, you got booted out for medical reasons. I didn't have that problem, but the problem I did have was I was making nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to the civil service and I found out what I could make as a civil servant. So I went and did the exam, and I went back in the same seat, in the same room, doing the same job for the same Navy,
Mm-hmm.
making twice the salary.
And how many
And so I
years?
stayed with them for 8 years until the explosion of the Kootenai.
And okay, so there was the explosion of the Kootenai. So how many years into your husband's service was he when he first experienced trauma? And then how many years after that did it take for him to actually get diagnosed with something?
The trauma was the Kootenai explosion, and he was in, I'd say, 10 years at the time. Yeah, because I was 8. Yeah, okay. So it was about 10 years when he was on the Kootenai.
Okay.
And he was on release routine at the time of the Kootenai and did a friend a favor by taking his billet because the friend had been accepted into officer training school, and he wanted to go so bad. And so he convinced Jim to take that cruise for him. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he was on, this is one of the problems was he was not on the Kootenai crew. He was on the Admiral's staff, and the Admiral's staff went on exercise, and they went from ship to ship to ship to ship. And this time they were on the Kootenai, experiencing everything that was going on in the Kootenai. So he was part of the Admiral's staff. But when they tried to look up the crew, his name never came up. So he just fell through the cracks until 2011, when our best friend called from Halifax and said he was one of the ones that was burned in the engine room. And he made it his life work to find all of the crew and make sure that they were doing okay. And this was 2011. It took him that long to find Jimmy. So he asked me at the time if Jim would talk to him. And I said, no, probably not. And he wouldn't. And so he said, well, get him to go to London to get diagnosed. And I said, I don't know if I ever could. And he said, well, we have to find out what's going on. He said, he couldn't find this information or that. This is 2011. There was no information being given from Ottawa. Everybody just shoved it under the rug. Nobody would talk about anything. But because this guy was so rabid to find every crew member, he finally found, anyway, I could go on for hours about this. So this was 2011. I ended up taking him to London, and he was getting diagnosed, and they asked me to come in with him because he wouldn't talk about it. And they asked me if I knew anything. And I said, I know every damn thing there is to know about the Kootenai explosion. I was in the message center working and received the message that Jim sent from the Kootenai on that morning. And I stayed in the message center and read every single message that went on any subject about the Kootenai, which probably wasn't a good idea at the time. But anyway, so what was the question? Let's see.
Well,
So
no, that's okay. Thank you for those
so
details.
they said, well, why don't you try putting a claim in for yourself? And so I did. And I was called and asked what I was doing. And what the hell did I want out of this? I said, all I want is just to tell our story. That's all I want. And he said, yeah, you want a pension out of this too. And I said, no. So I told him the two things that I wanted out of this. And he said, you haven't got a hope in hell.
Diane, tell me, Polly kind of talked about her husband's OSI and how that sort of manifested in their home. How did you and your husband, because both of you were diagnosed with PTSD in the end, how did both of, and I'm going to come to you after, Sheri, because I know you have a different perspective well, you will have a different perspective because you're the child in the equation, but how did your PTSD manifest in your home between you and your husband?
I turned into a ring screw. The person that was in the message center looking for any scrap of information, because you couldn't get any information from anyone. And I saw the messages going through, and I knew who died and what didn't. And I knew the wives of the one that died, and I couldn't say a word to them. Official Secrets Act, you can't divulge what you read. So I couldn't tell anybody about anything. I'm getting sorry. The
So
question.
Diane, it's okay. She was just asking you how it kind of manifested for
Yeah.
Jim.
So
like
with me, I found out that by yelling and screaming, I could get help. By being very forceful, I could get what I wanted. By being very forceful, I could get people the hell out of my way.
And did your husband manifest it in the same way? Did he also have that sort of aggression, or did it come across as different? How did it come across?
He went straight to the nearest bar. And in those days, they were given the tot. I don't know if you know about the tot.
No, I don't know what that is.
I forget the year that it was discontinued, but it was a Navy tradition. At noon, every person was poured an ounce and a half of pus or rum. It was thick stuff, and they got in line and they drank it, and they had to drink it in front of the officer that was doling it out. So Jim would take his tot And then he would go up to the nearest bar and he would drink until he
And just to, just from speaking with you earlier to clarify, so Polly, your husband was diagnosed with an OSI after he was released, but Diane, your husband actually had an OSI and had PTSD and then still served for a number of years, correct?
Yep,
Right,
31 years.
right. Okay, I'm going to come back to you. Tabitha, I want to go to you. I want to talk about first, how did you get into the military? What does your military family look like? And what was your career?
I was a medic. I wanted to be a nurse initially. And I used to volunteer for Toys for Tots in London. That's the Christmas campaign where we collect toys for underprivileged families. And one of the years, a recruiter was actually part of the Toys for Tots team. And I was telling him that I wanted to go back to school to be a nurse. And he's like, oh, well, you should do it through the military because they'll pay for it. And so I thought that was like the greatest thing ever because, free schooling is after already spending enough money on college. And a lot of my friends were in the reserves as well. I didn't actually know anyone in the Reg Force except for one of my cousins who's a lot older than me. So I don't really know him very well, but he was in the military. Other than that, they were all in the reserves. So I had a little bit of a picture of what the military was, but I, to be honest, didn't really know what I was getting into.
Okay.
But yeah, so I joined in 2006 and decided I didn't want to go back to school for another 4 years. So I changed my application to medic instead because it was the closest thing to a nurse. And I went to basic training and did all my medical training. And then I was posted to Petawawa in 2007. And from there, I served for just over 10 years before my medical release. But my medical release was actually for a physical neck injury. I wasn't diagnosed until after my release.
Right, it took you some time to get a diagnosis. So lead us up to, like, you get released, you're like, everything's fine. And how many years go by and what actually led to you pursuing a diagnosis?
So I was actually diagnosed 6 months after my release. My life was in just a state of chaos. My personal life, there was a lot going on, and then also being released from the military, and all of that stuff was going on. So I thought I had like some little bit of depression. And so my case manager was like, how about we just send you to the OSI clinic so you can at least be assessed there, and then we'll see. Because I was in the military for 10 years. So she's like, we'll just send you there. And then if it's depression, then, we just carry on from there. But if it is anything else, then we'll get a diagnosis. So all I thought was, yeah, my life is in chaos. So I have depression and I need a little bit of assistance with that. And I went and I did all the assessments and I talked to the psychologist, and kind of for the first time in a lot of years. I had been assessed once previously, but that was the first time I was ever actually honest with the mental health team.
Mm-hmm.
Previous to that, I always just answered the questions the way I knew they needed to be answered in order to pass the test, essentially. It's like anytime you come home from deployment, you always just answer the questionnaire exactly the way you know it's supposed to be answered so that you can go back to work and just carry on with your life. That's how I was until that day. And it was the first time I had ever actually been honest.
Why that day? What made you be honest that day?
To be honest, I was just exhausted. I was too tired to lie. I was too tired to actually not tell the truth anymore. Like it requires too much brain activity to actually give the right answers in the sense of what you want to tell them so that you don't get a diagnosis. I was just too tired. And it was, it had been a lot of years of a lot of craziness, and I just didn't have the energy to tell them what I would need to tell them in order to just get a diagnosis of depression.
Polly, I want to interrupt for 1 second. And Polly, I'm wondering if you might know the answer to this because you've worked in this field for so long. For those who are watching at home, what is the distinction between somebody who has depression or anxiety and being diagnosed with an OSI? Is
So-
there a distinction?
So, well, an OSI is a phrase that actually the military coined. So that's not actually a diagnosis.
Okay.
So we talk about, like, I work with OSIS, Operational Stress Injury Social Support Program. So in that, it encompasses anybody basically with mental health. So they say OSI to cover the umbrella of depression, anxiety, PTSD, and any sort of other mental health that might come related to service. So someone could be diagnosed under the OSI umbrella, call it an OSI, it's depression and anxiety.
Right.
So most people will say, I've been diagnosed with PTSD. And so, there's criteria that fits for all of those. So
Perfect. Thank you for that.
No
And
problem.
Tabitha, I find part of your story so fascinating because unlike some of the other stories I've heard of individuals who've been diagnosed with OSIs who take a bit more of a destructive path, tell us what your life looked like and how you were coping.
So my life was very high functioning. I heard the word resilient on a regular basis. The people that were in and out of my life over those years, they always just, they were floored at how resilient I was and how much I could take on and how much shit I could go through and still carry on. And, but in hindsight, obviously, there's a whole nother layer to that. So my route was, I just completely shut off. I had almost no emotions. On the outside, I did. If you saw me, you would think I was happy or things like that. But I never actually experienced the same thing on the inside as I was exhibiting on the outside. I was just kind of going along with the motions, and which was very effective for me. I was doing very well in my career. I was managing a lot of eggs in a lot of different baskets, and it allowed me the opportunity to excel. I completed almost an entire degree while working full time. It was very effective to not feel anything, because then you don't. I guess I was lucky because I didn't experience a lot of the other symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
I only experienced those in my head, not externally, and usually while I was sleeping, because obviously they have to come out somehow. But the numbness was not something I lived with it for so long. I didn't even realize that was what I was experiencing. I actually thought I felt things.
And through this all, so you were medically released when?
2016.
2016. And so I'm just doing the math here, but through this all, you have now had a child?
Yes.
And you had a child and then received your diagnosis?
Yeah, my son was 2.5 when I was diagnosed.
Okay, so I want to come back to that. Rich, I want to come over to you for a minute. Can you tell us sort of how you got in? What does your military journey look like?
Sure, I took some notes.
Look at you getting the glasses ready. I like it. He's so prepared.
I took some notes for myself. So how did I get in? I was born in Guelph, and I was kicked out of my house when I was 15. So I didn't really finish high school. I traveled around. I had a kid when I was 17. I had a kid when I was 18, different moms. And then I met my wife when I was 19. We were married when I was 21, and then I joined the Army when I was 24. So it was kind of necessity and kind of like I heard that it was pretty good pay. That was in 2006. So I heard that it was pretty good pay after a couple of years, and that you didn't need more than like a GED. So I joined in 2006, and I did my basic training and workup training from November 2006 until June 2007. Arrived in Petawawa in 2007 with my family, and then went on workup training to be deployed in 2008. We left for Afghanistan in September 2008. So a series of events, and then I was actually my symptoms presented like in theater. There was a few events that sort of happened in a row, and then I went to go see the mental health people, because I couldn't close my eyes anymore without being back in situations that had previously happened. And so they gave me sleeping pills, which was great. I made it through the rest of my tour and went home. And then it really went downhill because I sort of re-traumatized myself by being a different person and by acting different around the people that I was supposed to love. I wasn't treating them in a very loving way. And so I got like a lot worse. So anyways, yeah, that's pretty much how I got to where I was. And so then I was diagnosed with PTSD and major depression in 2010.
And this was while you were still serving?
Yes, yeah, I got out in 2018. It was a medical release. I could have stayed longer, but I was no longer able to do the like I was in the Armored Corps, and so my job was going out in the field and driving around and doing army stuff, like and so when I had to stop doing that stuff, and then I was given a position within my regiment, I was able to work in their wood shop. But I was watching everybody else go and do all the stuff that I wanted to do, and I was going further downhill. So they offered me a 3-year retention, but I only did about 1.5 years of it because it was too painful to stay there.
Rich, you said something very interesting. You said when you came back, you re-traumatized yourself. What does that mean? What does that look like?
It means that that the trauma that happened to me overseas, I think, was a certain extent, but I surprised myself because before I went overseas, I was the kind of person that would get punched in the face and then calmly ask the person why they did that. Like, why did you do that? Please don't do it again, kind of thing. And then, I come back from overseas and I'm the kind of person that has a 45-minute freak out because somebody spilled the milk, trivial, no reason for it kind of stuff. Now, when I came back from overseas, my kids would have been, quick math, like 9, 6 or 5, and like 3, right? And so they're much older, but I didn't feel like I was being a very loving, compassionate kind of father. And so some of the things I did was against my own personal moral values about how a family should be. Thankfully, in my opinion, it's thankful. The only person I ever really physically hurt was myself. Not that I'm thankful for that, but I am because, physically my kids, my wife stayed out of physical harm. But emotionally and that kind of stuff, certainly not. I brought the pain home to them, which wasn't very cool.
So I want to get into this. Thank you first and foremost for all of you for sharing, your experiences and sort of how your trauma manifested itself. I want to go over to Sheri because what I really want to get out of today is obviously hearing your experiences and understanding how these kinds of experiences can affect the military family. But then I also want to make sure we talk about what are the resources available? How did we start seeing the light? How did we start overcoming? But for Sheri, I want to talk to you about, you grew up with 2 parents who had PTSD. How far back can you remember where your life where you knew something wasn't quite right in your life?
So I'm going to kind of just preface my answers with, I have some Kleenex ready.
You get a towel if you need to, right?
Yeah, I can kind of when I talk about these kind of things, I wear my emotions on my sleeve. What can I first remember? I think that was I think it was maybe 5 years old, somewhere like that. I was in elementary school, and I remember trying to go to the bathroom, and I couldn't get into the bathroom because my father was passed out on the floor, and I kept hitting him with the door trying to get in.
How do you process that as a 5-year-old? Like what goes through your mind? What is that normal for you? Or is this like, something's not right?
You know what? I don't know, because I also remember like there was a lot of fun times. Like, Mom, there'd be times where you guys were sitting around the table in the dining room playing me. I think it was something by Richard Pryor. And, everybody was laughing, everybody was drinking, they were having a great time. But it would go from a great time to there might be a fight somewhere. So it was, you know what, you better stay away. If they say, go outside or do whatever, you better go outside. If someone's going to have a fight, then you better stay away.
And you grew up with 2 brothers, right?
Yeah.
Did you and your brothers ever talk about what was going on at home? No, never. And I find it really interesting. I want you to tell me, so Diane, I know this is really hard for you. It took you many, many, many years, because as we've talked about, during the time where you were serving and when your husband was serving, as you so eloquently put it to me when we spoke the other day, there was nothing available for families, right? There was, if your family was going through something back in the day, and thank God the landscape looks very different in terms of resources for families now, but there was nothing available. So you didn't actually start realizing the impact this had all had on your family until really fairly recently, right, Diane? If you want to maybe elaborate on that.
You know what? I'm going to say something here. I said there were 2 things that were kind of available from my perspective as a child growing up in the military and having 2 parents who were, heavily involved in different things going on. There were 2 things that were available. The first thing was either it was freely open to go and drink. You could go to the mess. There were things for activities for the kids. They could watch a movie. You could sit around, you could drink. Either that or it was the police. So if there was something going on, then it was the police that were called. There might be a priest that would come along, but it wasn't really very helpful. Those were the main kind of strategies.
How did this overarching trauma that so clearly shaped your family, how did that change the way you grew up when you reflect back?
Extremely stoic, a fighter. And I don't mean physical altercations, but very strong in my belief. And if there's something I want to get done, I'll get it done. But on the flip side, being stoic is not a good thing. Stoic is not a good thing because, as Tabitha says, you become numb.
Right.
You just kind of push things aside and you just keep going on and you just go on to the next thing.
Polly, I want to kind of ask you something similar. You had your husband who was diagnosed with an OSI. First of all, when he was diagnosed, did things kind of start falling into place? Was there like an aha moment that like there was a name to what was going on, or?
Well, do you want to hear that? Can I say it? Oh,
say whatever you want. This is it's like 8:30 at night. The kids are sleeping, so whatever.
So I did the happy dance because we had a diagnosis, and he wasn't just a bleep bleep. I'm going to say that. So it was a relief because I knew he wasn't the same person as he had been when we got married, right? But it was still really about navigating the system, right? Learning how to navigate the system, and all of the resources, even at that time, were very much directed at the veteran, right? So, I was to the point where I was very lucky, and I say I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky today that Sean has always, allow might not be the right word, but he's always welcomed me, maybe not as, you know, all the time loving it, but welcomed me to go in with appointments with them to sort of be that second set of ears and to understand everything that's going on, because, you know, all of the paperwork you got to fill out and all that, it's daunting, right? So the person with the trauma a lot of times can't do any of that, right? But they're expected to. So, you know, I fell into that role of that advocate and all those different things. So, you know, yes, he was given, you know, right away, he had psychology, you know, which was fantastic. But there was lots of layers there, right? Because there was a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? So the road has been long and windy, and you know, there's been a couple of inpatients, hospital stays for, you know, attempts, and then more recently, you know, again, there's always new research and new treatment techniques. So, you know, my philosophy now is, from what I've learned, is it's like they're pieces of the puzzle, and you have to find the pieces that fit in your puzzle, because your puzzle is a little bit different than my puzzle, right? Tabitha's puzzle is a little bit different than Rich's puzzle, but it's finding those pieces that fit for you.
Mhm.
And it looks a little bit different for everybody, but I mean, compared to 1999 to compared to now, the resources, we are very resource rich. Is it still difficult to navigate? Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Polly, you know, one of the things that when I spoke with all of you on Friday, I learned so much from that conversation. But really, one of the things we talked about is similar to most mental illnesses, it is a family experience. It is not just the person who is affected by the trauma, by the PTSD, by the diagnosis. How were you, Polly, affected by your spouse's trauma? How did that manifest in you?
Well, it manifested in me with depression, you know, on and off. I did reach out for counseling. And again, I think that was one of the best things that I ever did, fairly early on. I also just sort of did a lot of reading because I wanted to know, you know, what was going on and understand. Because I guess for me, the piece was, it was great that he was seeing a psychologist, but that was 1 hour a week. I was with him 24/7 with the boys, being the buffer, you know, being the pseudo counselor, being the punching bag, not physically, but you know what I'm saying, emotionally, verbally, being blamed for things. And like Rich says, you know, over spilt milk, you don't know why you have this meltdown, you know. and and so I think, you know, what really hit me when Rich said that is it is that other layer of sort of that guilt and shame of treating your family the way you treated them, right? And seeing it manifest as the kids grow, or you know, different things like that as a parent. I mean, even myself, our kids are 28 and 25 now, and I, you know, it's a difficult piece for me, and I had to do a lot of therapy on myself for guilt that I felt with
Mhm.
my children over things that they had to go through. So it's not just the person with the OSI.
Yeah.
It's everybody around them. And you know, the sooner, and one of the reasons I love what I do, and you know, I've been blessed to be able to do it for the last 10 years, but is to share my story, to make the road a little less bumpy. You have to go through your bumps. They're your bumps to go through. But if I can help you navigate, you know, around this bump, but over that bump, you know, and I can walk alongside you or find somebody to walk alongside you, that's the key. The key
Mhm.
is to not do it alone, right? Because, you know, the person with the OSI, you feel so alone.
Mhm. And Rich, I want to go over to you. You talked about how you felt you were acting in your family, and we are talking about how trauma can affect the full family. How do you feel that your wife and your kids were affected, maybe pre-diagnosis and post-diagnosis? Because I'm curious to know if they sort of acted differently around you once you were diagnosed.
Sure. Yeah, there was between 2009 and 2011, like, and maybe sort of the end of 2009, I did a lot of different medication that they gave me, and a lot of different therapies. And I don't have a great recollection of that particular time. Not that I don't have a fond recollection of it. I mean, like, I have barely any recollection of it. It's very much kind of gone, and the points that I do remember, I wish I wish I didn't. So, but I guess that one of the biggest things is we weren't able to go and do stuff. We used to go out to do things all the time. Like, my wife is the middle of 9 kids, and her whole family really likes getting together and stuff. But as you can imagine, 9 kids and then grandkids and cousins, etc., Christmas time gets busy. So that was something that was really difficult for me to handle. So I would, they wouldn't see me there. I would go and wave while I went on my way to a bedroom and lock myself in there and tell them, come and get me when it's done.
Mhm.
So, and a lot of the time, just dealing with the kids at all, like in any manner, was like I wasn't able to deal with anybody. And so I would be left out of it much of the time by necessity. Since then, I've started definitely being a bigger part of their life, but they certainly face more criticism on my bad days than I suspect that they would otherwise. I'll go around and find little things to be like, just find a reason to get mad some days. And lately, I've been catching myself at that and been like, okay, I'll see you guys after school, and go. But so they also, not only did they not get to see me a lot during my deployment and my training, but then there was the time where I was spaced out, and then there was the time where I was in therapy, and like, I went to Bellwood, I went to different like equine therapy, I went to I was always away from home trying to do some kind of therapy and stuff. So, and I ended up, because all those medications messed me up a lot, I ended up self-medicating with cannabis. And so then I was also bringing sort of that illegal, because it was illegal at the time, a legal component into the house, which obviously wasn't good. There was one time where my wife had an eye ulcer. And so I had to take her to the hospital. Our oldest boy was 11 at the time. And the middle boy he must have been 7 or 8. Anyways, he accidentally called 911. And apparently, if there's no one over the age of 18 in the house, the police have the right to come in and just make sure that everything's okay. So I ended up getting charged with, like, minor possession or whatever. And so, but I mean, like, that was a huge ordeal for them, that before my diagnosis, that wasn't a thing that I did. That was, like, illegal things were not a part of my situation, I guess. But afterwards, I really didn't have all of the medication and stuff that they were giving me was seeming to make me worse and worse and worse. And with that, I was able to dumb myself down enough. That's the only thing I can call it, to a point where I could interact on an almost human level for a little while. And then, of course, when I got caught with that, they started doing like drug tests on me monthly. So I started drinking like crazy. Ugh, and that was the worst, because I ate hangovers.
Tell me, Rich, now that your kids are older, how do you navigate this conversation with them? How do you try to explain, sort of, here's what happened, here's how I'm coping? How do you help them understand where you're coming from?
Sure. Well, they sort of grew up with it, and have progressed with me. I'm not exactly private about like how I'm feeling or whatever else, but a lot of the time it looks to me like a conversation later on where I approach them and say, like, hey, this is what happened, and I lost control because because I wasn't doing the things that I need to do or whatever, and it wasn't your fault, so I do a lot of that. And recently I've started to try to make a much bigger point of good things, like of positives. So I mean, maybe that's just something you learn as a parent eventually, or whatever, but I've found that it's made a difference in their lives. I will say that that I must be the luckiest guy on the planet, because, like, so I mean, I went away basically from the end of 2006 until maybe the beginning of 2014. Essentially, I was gone, either on training
in
or
some way or another. Yes.
some way or another. And somehow I moved my family away from all of their support that they had, because we grew up in Guelph, and that's where all the family was. And my wife has raised one kid's in university for neuroscience. The other two are both on honor roll in like high school, and she put herself through nursing school, and now she's a mental health nurse. Like, but I'm very proud of them.
That's tremendous. Tabitha, I want to go over to you because I want to talk about not only how did your situation help your family affect your family, but you had a child during all of this. So how does that, and having a child is such a profound experience to begin with, and so life-changing to begin with. How did you go through the trauma of PTSD while giving birth, while raising a child? How did it affect your relationship with your child, or did it?
That's a tough one. I was definitely a good mom, or am a good mom, I should say. But I was a surface level mom. And so what that means is that I barely felt any connection to my child for the first probably 3 years of his life. Apparently he didn't notice that, because we have an amazing relationship. We're very, like, he as probably just the best kid. Sorry if you guys can hear my dog losing it. And so it was very challenging, and it was actually the main reason that I started getting treatment, because I realized that that's not normal. The day your child's born is supposed to be the happiest day of your life, and it was one of the most traumatic days of my life. Unfortunately, his father also has an OSI, and he was in a very bad place then. And so he kind of was not very supportive in that moment, and said some things that, like Rich said, things that he would, if he could, he'd take them back in a second. And so because of that, I went through the motions. I was very involved, very present, just not emotionally. I work very hard at that now, to be present emotionally when I'm with him now, to make up for all that time. I can't make up that time. I never will be able to make up that time. It's something that all of us regret, is that we can't change those relationships, and the damage that we have done. All we can do is work towards repairing it and changing it. But even now, our relationship, if I'm having a bad day, I just tell him I'm having a bad day. He might only be 6, but it's the only way I know how to maneuver it. He's probably needs to be a little bit more mentally mature than a lot of kids his age, because he does have to know how to maneuver, 2 people having a bad day at different times, because he lives in 2 separate households. But we have conversations about it now. And if I'm having a bad day and I need a moment, I just tell him Mommy's going in a timeout. Mommy needs a timeout. Mommy's going to lose it, so she needs to go in a timeout. And, I'll come back when I'm ready. And it's not your fault. I'm just having a bad day. And then I go and I take the, 5 or 10 minutes that I need to give myself that space to calm down and then be able to come back to it and kind of have that conversation. He's not quite old enough to understand, like, there's not a label to it. He doesn't know that, mommy has PTSD. There's not a label on it for him by any means, but he knows that there's something there. And, I see the little things that developed in him, like separation issues and things like that. I can see those things because I am hyper vigilant to emotions and the way my actions affect everybody in my wake, essentially. So I see all the little things in him that, I try really hard to kind of reassure in him so that as he ages, these won't follow him through the rest of his life. But yeah, we have a great relationship. It's been very challenging. And it's, not necessarily your proudest moments in life, but he is a great kid. So I'm super proud of him for that. And, all I can do is just keep working at showing up every day and, making it normal and okay for him that, like, just because he has my kid goes to a school where none of the kids in his class have a 2-parent household except for him. So he's got like a whole plethora of fun things that he gets to experience. But the best thing about that is now when kids at school say things that aren't true, like, nobody can have 2 moms and nobody can have 2 dads or anything like that. He's like, actually, you're wrong. So
good for him.
There's these resiliencies that I see in him that I don't see in other kids his age, that, like, I can see there's certain resiliencies that he has developed because of this. So it's not all negative. There are positives that he gets some really cool tools that he's, as he ages and as I learn tools, I give him those tools. So as he gets older, he's going to have the tools to deal with difficult times differently than we had, because we didn't necessarily have the tools to deal with it.
That's right.
So in that sense, like, as much as, maybe I wish that he didn't have to go through it, I know that as he ages, he's going to have all of these amazing resources and tools that he's going to be able to use. And we're blessed that it's at a time where he will have that.
Well,
not everybody got that.
That's a really great transition. So I want to, before we end today, because I think it's really important that you all shared your experiences, because I'm sure there are many out in not even just the military family community, but in the general civilian community whose families have gone through trauma and have manifested in different ways, and they're probably seeing themselves in you. So, the fact that you're helping them feel like they're not the only ones is huge tonight. But I think where I really want to take this before we end is, all of you on this screen have done tremendous work to, I don't want to use the words get over, because I'm sure it's something that you guys are going to be working on for the rest of your lives, but to move past, to cope, to deal with the trauma that has occurred in your lives. Diane, I want to go to you first, because you had this lingering in your life for so long, and it was only recently that you realize there is a problem and there are tools out there. And as you said, you are on a mission now. So tell us, what are your coping strategies? What do your tools look like? How are you sort of finding the positive in this?
Have Paulie's bedside telephone number.
Polly, are you going to be giving out your cell phone number at the end of this for those watching?
No, seriously. There's, I think the best course that the average person can take is talk to their doctor first. And if they just say there's something wrong, I don't know what it is, then they can help you. And that's the first step. If they're military, there is the family support centers, and they can call there.
And I think, Polly, that was part of the package you sent that we've put up on our chat today. So for anybody watching, just scroll back up to the top of the chat.
But I think the biggest thing is to stay in touch with yourself, to know yourself, to trust yourself, to learn how to love yourself. have we got time?
Keep going. We're not going anywhere.
I think I had an epiphany the first time that Polly had a retreat for the wives of military people. And I thought, well, I'm a wife, I qualify. And so I showed up there with all of my armor on and all of my, you're not going to talk to me about anything attitude. And these women were just wonderful women. And I heard all the way through the week, we were there for a weekend. And I heard them talking about the husband SOB this and SOB that. And I took part in the conversation because my husband was doing SOB things. And I was the victim here, don't you know? And so it was the last day, Polly, I think, when somebody, I know who it was now. Anyway, she started talking about the SOB, this and that. And it was like a 2x4 on the side of my head. And I thought, oh my God, I am the SOB in this scenario. And I realized what I've done to my children and what I've done to my husband. I had just as much to blame about everything as he did. And so I had to stay there. I had to realize that it was me. And I can only fix me. I can't fix anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, I don't think any of my children are happy talking about feelings. I don't think I am. But I work on it. I work hard on it.
Who is? There's like,
but my two sons definitely don't know what an emotion is from a hole in the ground. But that's their problem, not mine. All I can do is help myself and stay in tune with myself. And if I'm having a bad day, reach out to somebody that I know will help me.
And Sheri, when your mom kind of had this epiphany and started doing the work, how did that change the relationship that the two of you have?
you know, both of my parents have been very close with both of my parents all along, really. And I think I've always known that there's been something, but it wasn't really until 2011 that they started, to do the work. The thing, honest to God, for them and for us as a family was the service dog lady.
Yeah.
That was
huge.
That was a huge deal for our entire family, not just for mom and dad.
Yeah.
For me, for my son. It was huge, huge.
How did the service, for those who are watching, how did the service dog impact your lives? How was that a positive effect?
Taught us how to laugh again. She did. I had the diagnosis and I came home and I thought, what the hell? Now I'm PTSD, just another wonderful label to put on my forehead. Thank you a hell of a lot. So I thought, well, what are my friends going to do if they hear that I've got PTSD? What are they going to? So I went on the internet to see what PTSD was. I didn't know what the hell it was. And I found this site for National Service Dogs. And that week they had started a program for vets with PTSD. So I went to they are in Cambridge, and I went to their back door and banged on the door. And I said, have you got dogs for PTSD? And she said, yes. She said, do you know someone with PTSD? I said, yeah, me. And she didn't believe me at all. And so I started through the training process, which it takes a long time and there's a lot into it. And I said, the only way I'll take this dog is if you train it for the both of us. We both have it. We both need help. We both need whatever this damn dog can do, teach it for two of us. So she said, well, we can't do that. But anyway, we fought about it. And she ended up giving me the dog. It was my dog. And that night I was coming down the hallway and I heard the dog in with Jim. And I heard my husband laughing. I hadn't heard my husband laughing and years and years and years and years. And so that's where we started with the dog. And she very quickly became attached to Jim. I think she knew I could probably fight my way out of a paper bag. But Jim, he withdraws. He almost disappears. You don't see him. He's quiet, and that means he's going away, far, far away. And she would go up to him and she would just get on his lap and she'd make him take him for a walk. And out they'd go and go for a walk. And one time we were having a thing. We had many things. And the dog went and got a toy and threw it up in between us. and I started to laugh right away. And my husband thought I was laughing at him in this argument. So we had a bigger argument. So the dog went and got another toy. And this is what happened. It's just, she taught us it's not that big of a deal. For God's sakes, take a break. And she used to, because I used to get up and have all these night terrors and everything else, and I'd wander around the house, and lady would come out and she'd look at me like, again, huh? She just made us laugh again. She brought us into the room.
That's brilliant.
Where we could deal with things.
That's
Yes.
brilliant. What I so talking about it, but also a service animal. I love it. And Polly, I want to go to you. What is it that started turning things around for you? And just so you know, before I keep going here, I'm getting comments on the back end here that there are so many comments on our Facebook page commending all of you for having such strength and courage, for sharing your stories, and how proud people are of you, and that they're so thankful for your honesty. So you're already having an impact, and we're only an hour and 2 minutes in. So thank you. Polly, tell me, what was that turning point for you? What were the resources and tools that helped your family cope?
I think number one, early on in some individual counseling, when my spouse was he was hospitalized, and then from there he went to Bellwood, and the therapist that I had talked to me about grief. And again, my sense of grief was nobody died. Like, I don't quite, I always thought of grief in that way. And, she really talked to me and did work with me about grieving the spouse that I had imagined he would be, the partner, the father, all of that. And it really, I think it just helped me put stuff into perspective and manage moving forward. So one of the big things I always say with people is manage your expectations, because, I have to every day, is this a good day or a bad day? And so I need to manage, is he capable of doing that today? And it's not to give him a pass by any means, but it's also to be respectful and understand and validate where he is that day, right? And so for us, really, I would say 2007. So, I mean, that's going, like, our oldest son was in grade 9 and our youngest son was in about grade 6. And he went to Homewood for the PTSD program. And that's where he found sort of grounding, breathing, just really great tools for helping him with his anger and his outbursts. And it also was the first time that he realized the impact that it had on the kids and I. So that was sort of planting the seed, right? And then from then, it's just been, going to a therapist regularly. He meditates. He's done other programs since, other, other treatments like RTMS, which is repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. Like, there's so many new treatments out there that, I always say to him, because of what I do, I say, can you just try this? Because then I can tell peers what it's like, right? So he's kind of like my little guinea pig some days, right? But I mean, he's a great sport with it. And I think for us, the turning point for us as a couple was 2013, when we did an equine program. And it gave us a different language of you know, you scared away the horses and the horses aren't ready to come back. So that would be the kids and I, right? Whereas before I might say, you know, you're being a savage beast and get out of my blah, blah, blah face, right? Whereas, and then he started to pick up on it, right? And started to say, oh, I've scared away the horses. Okay, I'm going to give you your space. So it became a good communication tool, you know, but really it's really trial and error. And like when Rich talks about medications, I mean, I can remember when my husband was on 15 medications at once, and I was the only one that knew all of them. And I would go in and rhyme them off to the doctors, and they'd be like, "What?" And I'm like, "I have to know this, right? This is my job."
Yeah.
So, you know, so that really, you know, now we're in a good place. He has a relationship with the boys, but we've worked really hard on that.
Right.
Is it always the greatest relationship? No, but we're working on it.
Yeah. I love that, the equine therapy and you're scaring away the horses. Well, I'm going to start telling my husband that, you know, when I act out, I'm like, did I scare away the horses? I'm going to use that from now on. He's not going to have a clue what I'm talking about. Tabitha, let's go over to you, because that's obviously at some point you said you were just so tired of this numbing and you decided you needed to get the diagnosis, you needed to move forward. What are some coping mechanisms and tools that you've put into place to kind of get you over that hump and that you're kind of using as you move forward?
Well, therapy is my biggest tool. I think that every single person could benefit from a therapist, regardless of whether you have a mental health condition or not. So that's definitely has been my saving grace, I would say. Boundaries is another big thing that has allowed me the opportunity to grow and to heal. Boundaries for myself and my own behavior. You know, acknowledging when I'm having a bad day and putting that boundary in place that maybe I'm going to not go near other people because I don't want them to deal with my wrath, and I don't want them to have to walk on eggshells, because that's not fair to them. And also boundaries with people that trigger me, I guess would be the best way to say that. I have a lot of boundaries that I have put into place in my co-parenting relationship that changed that dynamic and required a lot less work on my part in terms of my sessions and things like that. It allowed me the space to start talking about the things that I really truly needed to talk about rather than the things that were happening on a day-to-day basis. And then having certain hobbies, like for me, volunteering with OSIS and running group and doing these kind of things has.
You run and you run a women's group now, correct?
Yeah, twice a month. We have a night group and a daytime group for women veterans. And then Polly also has a women's group or family group. It's not just women, so family group. There are men's groups and co-ed groups as well. But there was definitely a need there for women only groups. So those are the kind of things, like just embracing my hobbies when I need to get lost, or being silly. Like before, I didn't know how to be silly. I've forgotten that part of myself. And now, you know, if I'm having a bad day, it's a matter of cranking whatever ridiculous music I feel like putting on at that moment and jumping around and dancing and just letting it all out. And sometimes it's just a matter of being like, giving myself the opportunity to just let it go. Rather than hold on to it. And yeah, not always sitting in it. And I would say the last thing is being honest with people. It's the thing that I have to work very hard at still to this day, and probably for a very long time, is actually being honest with where I am at, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, not protecting the world, because they don't need to be protected from my feelings, maybe from my behavior, but not from my feelings. So honesty, just where I have to work really hard at it, but it's been very helpful, just allowing me the opportunity to actually be honest with people. It forces me to be honest with myself as to what I'm actually thinking and feeling, rather than going into robot mode.
And Rich? You've done a tremendous amount of work as well, culminating in the fact that you're doing some volunteer counseling as well. But tell us kind of what helped you sort of get over the hump and start healing.
Sure. So at first, I thought that the
Sorry, my phone keeps ringing. Apparently every telemarketer in the entire city decided that they needed to call in this very moment. I apologize.
No worries. So at first I thought that the Army needed to fix me because everything else they just give you. They give you training, they give you kit, they give you, you know, deployments, whatever, and they just tell you go do this and then you'll be done and that's it. So I was expecting something to just like come along and fix it for me. So the medication or the therapy or whatever, but it didn't work very well. And so every time that it didn't work, it was really awful. Like it was bad because I had failed. I had failed the course or whatever, right? And you don't want to fail courses because, you know, everybody's going to laugh at you. So, but then I guess that what's gotten me over the hump was the realization that I don't need to be perfect. I don't have to be cured. I can find I can find a level of sanity. I can find a level of human in me that that is acceptable and achievable. And so having a bit of compassion for myself, and the fact that this is really not easy to deal with, you know, for the people in my life, but also for me. You know, it's hard for me too. So so now I've done CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. I've done dialect behavior training. I've done you know, equine therapy. I currently use cannabis as a as a prescription medicine, and an antidepressant. And then I also took some mindfulness courses, which were probably some of the most helpful things. But so I've also done jujitsu. I joined a club of other veterans learning how to play the guitar. First, it was Guitars for Vets, and then Music Healing Veterans. I have taken a yoga teacher training and started a personal yoga practice. And I have done a lot of diving into different like self-help books and that sort of thing. So really it's not, there's no thing, it's everything. It's everything. And it takes up a lot of my life. But without it, there wouldn't be a lot of life left to take up.
Yes.
So
Way to
so
go.
as a result, yeah, it is a lot of work to maintain it. But you know, and that's one of my issues with having depression and PTSD. Sometimes the depression makes me not want to do the things that help, and it's like I just had a real struggle with it over Christmas time. But I'm getting back into everything now. I'm starting to work up the calluses on my fingers again from the guitar. So so yeah, it's everything. I haven't tried a service dog yet, but I have a dumb beagle
Well, we are at 9:15. It might have been the fastest hour and 15 minutes of my life. The stories that you shared with us tonight, the experiences, the fact that you were so raw and so unencumbered. I'm so privileged to have had you on with me tonight. I know that you will have touched everybody who have watched. I know that you will have helped some who are watching, who are experiencing it, whether it's firsthand or have a family member that's experiencing it. I thank you all for the continued work that you are all doing, because you are making differences in people's lives by speaking out, by volunteering. Polly, thank you for bringing forth everybody tonight. It was such a privilege to meet everybody. For those watching tonight, if you have any questions and need any other resources, feel free to email us at info@twsfoundation.ca, and we will point you in the right direction and possibly get you Polly's cell phone number. And I thank you all for joining me tonight. So thank you very, very much. Thank you. I'm so
Are you
grateful.
dismissed now?
Thanks for having us.
It was
Good
great.
night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.